what a year that was, 2020. This is one of the many police checkpoints I had to go through. This chap here, waving his hand up and down, he's not giving me a rude signal, by the way. It's a sort of Latin American way of saying, I really like what you just did. And what he was referring to was my a bit of paper stuck to the windscreen on the front of the bike, where I showed all my documents and everything, and he was simply giving me his seal of approval, shall we say. But well, the whole thing, the pandemic had pros and cons, and for me, luckily, there were more pros than cons, in that I could ride around the city and have it all almost to myself. In fact, the checkpoints were a bit of a pain in the neck, but you just got used to them. And generally speaking, because I stuck everything on the front of the bike, they just waved me through. So that was but of course at first I hadn't realised that it would make my life so much easier by displaying everything I needed on the front. And on occasion, of course, I had to resort to stopping, taking everything out of my wallet and showing them all sorts of things. But once I twigged onto that, it made life a lot easier, I can tell you. This here is one of the many drives I did into the centre of BA and back, showing the deserted streets. It was a very odd experience. I didn't ride very fast because of it, because there didn't seem to be a rush. Well, there was no traffic. And the occasional bus, the occasional vehicle that had authorization to be out and about. And to be quite honest with you, it felt very much like, well, it was a curfew, in all but name. And of course, many Argentines remember the curfews of the past, of the 70s and early 80s, when the country was under a military dictatorship, and that wasn't very funny at all. And the other thing, talking of pros, was that I picked up quite a lot of business because of the lockdown, because people couldn't get out and about, and they needed things delivered and collected. So I was on the bike every single day, doing deliveries and all over the city. It was good for me. Obviously, I took precautions and made sure I didn't get too close to anybody. But in all the excitement and enjoyment of doing it, the pandemic was really at the back of my mind, in effect. So this route here, if you try driving down these roads on a normal day, it would be absolutely packed with traffic. So, as you can see, it was a luxury for me, it really was. This is actually the motorway out of the city, heading north. Here we have another police checkpoint, but I think they're probably just heading off for a tea break or something. And just here, what I do here is fill up at my usual filling station, because you never have to queue up. Because all the filling stations in Argentina are attended service.
¿Cómo? ¿Sí? ¿me está grabando? Sí. Bueno, permiso, si no te lo molesta.
No me molesta, no está bueno, porque a mí me encantan las motos también.
Bueno. Es para un recuerdo de esta crisis.
Ah, está perfecto.
Digamos.
¿De dónde es usted?
Soy inglés. Pero yo vivo en Olivos.
Ah, pero vive acá en Olivos.
Sí, sí.
¿Qué le cargamos, premio o super?
Super, por favor. 300 pesos.
¿300?
Sí.
As you can see just here, I obviously haven't got my act together and have to dig around for all my stuff, take my gloves off, the usual. All this kind of thing takes a long time on a bike because you have to stop, you have to make sure you're not in gear or anything like that. And she also wanted to see my ID card, which I then had to extract from my wallet, but they've got a job to do, so what can you do really? You just have to get on with it. And I just got so used to it after a while that it was, well, that was before I stuck the papers on the front, of course. And but what I enjoyed the most was having the city to myself and the roads to myself, pretty much. This particular bit here is where you actually drive into the city, and if you try to do that at say 9 or 10 in the morning, it's rush hour obviously, and it's just full of cars. But most days when I did it, it was exactly like this, nothing at all. I really enjoyed it. Here, this is known as Villa 31, which is like a shanty town, number 31, which has been here for donkey's years. Probably 30 or 40 years, if I'm not mistaken, and they've claimed the land, like squatters if you like, and now it's practically legal, if you know what I mean. Here's another checkpoint. Now, I had a bit of a misunderstanding with this fellow because he just said go on. Yeah, chap had to say it twice because I didn't. He said something like "Avante nomás." In other words, go on. You don't have to stop. But I couldn't hear him properly. But anyway, this is the Avenida 9 de Julio, and obviously the world famous obelisk, which you can't really miss. And that's from where all the mileages or kilometrage is measured, i.e. the centre of Buenos Aires itself. Well, I love riding down it, even when it's rush hour and full of traffic. But this was just great fun. All the lights were green. I can't remember where I was going, but south of Buenos Aires somewhere, presumably. And this is another view going into the city again. Yet another police checkpoint. A lot of people think that the whole lockdown business of police checkpoints everywhere, and don't forget the police here are heavily armed, and you don't really want to put a foot out of place. A lot of people think that the whole curfew business was unconstitutional. Well, technically speaking, I suppose it was. I don't think it's written down in the Constitution anywhere that you can lock people up and not allow them to leave their houses. So, in theory, yes, it probably was unconstitutional. Talking of the Constitution, the President himself, Alberto Fernandez, no relation to the Vice President, who is also called Fernandez, he got himself into a lot of hot water because just before the mid-term elections part 1 in August or September, I forget when it was, it emerged that last July, in other words July 2020, at the height of the lockdown, he had hosted with his partner or wife a couple of parties at the presidential residence, the huge place in Olivos near where we live. and over a dozen guests, nobody wearing masks, no kind of authorization given, all having a wonderful time drinking champagne and the finest foods in the land. And he really didn't have an answer for it except to say that he had committed a gross error. Well, that's fair enough, I suppose. But anyway, the long and the short of it is that he took a bit of a bashing in the midterm elections, part one, because of all this, and since then they've been scurrying around like headless chickens, trying to repair the damage, spending a fortune on campaigning, and sending out their brightest individuals, in inverted commas, to try and convince everybody that really they're not so bad after all. But the general feeling is that in the midterm elections part two, the first ones I think were known as the primaries, part two coming up in just over a week's time, my feeling is that it's not going to change anything, so I think they're still going to suffer. But anyway, all it just goes to show is that in the end, just like everywhere else, it's one rule for them and one rule for us. And, you know, but in a country like Argentina, where the police are armed and can look pretty scary at times, you really have to toe the line, because arguing with them doesn't really get you very far. I used to try the old trick of no speaky Spanish, but it only works on certain occasions, and if you come across a policeman who does speak English, then you're screwed. But anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. Until next time.